The stranger had left Sparta behind, but it refused to leave him. Even as the sea winds of the Peloponnesus cooled his skin, he still felt the dry, unmoving air of Laconia clinging to his thoughts, as if the silence of that place had etched itself into the marrow of his bones. He wrote feverishly in the evenings, journals filled with impressions, contradictions, fragments of dialogue. But every sentence died halfway through. How do you describe a city that isn't alive, but isn't dead either? A city that no longer believes in war, but prepares for it every day. That says nothing, and yet answers everything. Back in Athens, his colleagues laughed softly. Sparta? One of them smirked. Their shadows clinging to rocks. Another called it a living museum, a ruin too stubborn to collapse. But he said nothing. He remembered the eyes of the old man at the bathhouse. They were not the eyes of a ruin. He traveled across Greece that spring, tracing the echoes of Sparta, not the armies, not the battles, but the ideas. And what he found surprised him. In remote villages, he met children whose fathers taught them to endure, to hold pain like a secret. In distant islands, he heard stories of discipline, of silence being stronger than speech. They didn't call it Spartan. They didn't need to. It was already inside them. But there were darker shadows too. In newly rising states, kings invoked the image of Spartan control to justify tyranny. In military schools, boys were beaten in the name of tradition. And among philosophers, the word Spartan had become a tool, sharp, simple, brutal, to win arguments about the soul. It was then the scholar realized Sparta had not died. It had scattered. It had leaked into the cracks of civilization, not through armies, but through memory, through admiration, through fear. He returned once more to Laconia, months later. This time he carried no scrolls, no questions, no expectations. The city looked the same, too old to change, too proud to explain. The same weathered stone, the same olive trees curling toward dust. But something had shifted. The old man was gone. The barracks stood empty. The helots no longer flinched at the wind. Something had softened, or perhaps something had simply surrendered. The silence remained, but it no longer pressed. It listened. He walked alone toward the riverbank, where once the boys had bathed after drill. Now it was quiet. Wildflowers grew along the edges. He sat on a stone and watched the sun drop below the hills, remembering a time he had never lived. Then he heard it. Not words, not footsteps, but a rhythm, soft, steady, like breath, like memory, like a city that once had been a storm, now humming to itself in exile. The foreigner returned to Athens changed, but few noticed. He no longer raised his voice in debate. He no longer cared to argue over definitions of courage or discipline. He simply listened. And when he did speak, it was slowly, as if each word carried a cost. He wrote a book, quietly, without fanfare. It bore no title on the cover, just a single symbol, a broken lambda, carved deep into the leather. Its pages were not history, nor philosophy. They were fragments, observations, stories half told. A Spartan boy learned silence, one entry read. But I wonder, was it taught or inherited from the land itself? In that quiet volume, Sparta lived again, not through dates or generals, but through textures, cracked sandals, olive pits, blood on a child's knuckles, wind that tasted of stone. He mailed a copy to each of the men who had once mocked him. Most never responded. One returned it, pages torn out. But one wrote back. "I went," the letter read, "not to Sparta, but to my father, as village. I watched the boys wrestle in the dust, and I didn't stop them." I told my son a story about a place that burned boys into silence. He asked me if it was true. I said yes. Then I said never again. The scholar wept, because finally, someone had understood. Years passed. Empires rose, fell, reshaped. Sparta remained, not as power, but as rumor. Travelers still walked its roads. Some came seeking ghosts. Others came for the silence. Some knelt and kissed the ground where Leonidas once stood. Others scoffed and said, This is all that's left?" But it didn't matter. Sparta no longer needed worship. It had become something stronger than stone. A myth. Not the kind told to children at bedtime, but the kind that hides in the walls of empires, shaping laws, hardening men, silencing weakness. It became a symbol wielded by both tyrants and rebels, by generals and poets, by those who would conquer and those who would endure. And somewhere, in a ruined courtyard where boys once fought with wooden spears, a single olive tree still grows. Its roots dig deep into broken earth. Its branches twist upward, stubborn, quiet, unbending. Just like Sparta. And yet, the olive tree was not alone. Each year, a few seeds carried by wind or birds would take root nearby. Most died. The soil was dry, the shadows too cold. But a very few, survived. One day, a girl passed through the ruins with her grandfather. They came from the north, following no map, chasing only stories. He pointed to the hills where warriors once trained. She picked up a piece of broken pottery, curved like the edge of a shield. "What is this place?" she asked. He didn't answer with facts. He didn't name kings or wars. Instead, he crouched beside her and said, "This is where men became silence, where silence became strength." She said nothing. But as they walked away, she tucked the shard into her coat pocket. Later that night, she wrote about it. She wrote about the wind and the tree and the stillness that felt heavier than stone. And she didn't stop. From that single memory came poems and stories and visions of a world where warriors didn't shout, they simply endured. And somewhere across the sea, a sculptor in a far-off land carved a figure not of a soldier mid-battle, but one standing still, shield grounded, eyes closed. The inscription read, "Strength does not raise its voice." And in a city of glass towers and noise, a teacher told his restless class about Sparta. Not the battles, not the blood, but about the way they walked, in silence, in line, as if the earth itself were watching. Some laughed, some rolled their eyes. But one boy went home and threw away his fake trophies. He told his father he wanted to earn something real. Sparta had become something else. Not a place, not even an idea. A question. One whispered not in words, but in the things people did when no one was watching. How they stood, how they bore pain, how they chose not to speak when speech was weak. And in every generation, that question would reappear. Not loudly, never loudly, but in the quiet moments, in the cold morning before a test, in the pause before stepping into danger, in the silence between heartbeats before telling a truth that might cost everything. It would whisper, "Will you break?" And sometimes someone answered, no, not because they were taught, not because they were told, but because something ancient, something buried deep, rose in them like a shadow and stood unbending. That was Sparta. Not the blood, not the walls, not even the warriors, but the echo that survives them. A city turned to myth, a myth turned to mirror, and in that mirror, some would see violence, others, silence. But a few, a rare few, would see themselves.